Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Let's Talk. I have a special guest here tonight with me, the one, the only, the very amazingly knowledgeable man, super awesome guy, Chris Wyatt. To my, I think it's my right. Yeah, all right. Um, this man is quite knowledgeable about a lot of things because he used to be in the. He's a retired colonel of the U.S. Army. He was in the military for 36 years, and um, I don't. I mean, you should probably explain what you did better than I will. And if you guys also want to know more about Chris, I did leave a link in the description. He has a show right after this one, which you can talk a bit about. You can take the floor now and explain to people who you are and your upcoming show.
Well, thanks a lot, Joe. I appreciate it. As you said, I'm a retired U.S. Army colonel. I served 36 and a half years in the Army, 34 that were on active duty. The rest was in the Ohio National Guard when I returned to university to finish my studies. I was a signal soldier during the Cold War in West Germany. As a soldier, I became a non-commissioned officer, then went back to university, was in the Guard for a couple of years while I finished my studies, came back in as an intelligence officer in 1989, served in that capacity at the tactical, the operational, strategic levels of warfare. And then later in my career became what I'd always wanted to be. I had a plan since 1984 when I was listed to become a foreign area officer or regional specialist for Africa. Regional specialist for Africa, I've been assigned and worked in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Nigeria, Uganda, and Ethiopia. That's where I lived at, and I worked in American embassies in those locations with host nation and other countries, allied countries. But then I've also worked in probably close to 40 of countries across Africa beyond those. And 3 tours in Germany, 1 tour in Italy, of course, the requisite nonsense in the Balkans, Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, all those things. First Gulf War. And I've done a lot of different unusual things. I've taught at the undergraduate level at Iowa State University. I've taught postgraduate at the U.S. Army War College. I've worked at the Pentagon, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency. People ask me to describe this. At some point, you start to wonder, gosh, is this guy just boasting? No, I didn't say I was great and wonderful at any of those things. I just said I was there. So you can take from it what you want,
Yeah.
but not a boast, just saying that I was at those places. And so I've worked a lot of unusual things too: professional military education, exercises, combat, counterterrorism, humanitarian assistance. Also done things like HIV and Ebola programs, Ebola research, tuberculosis, malaria, all sorts of things. You name it. I've had some involvement in many things throughout the course of my career. Worked strategic communications, public affairs, lots of different things. So maybe I wasn't good at anything, and they just kept moving me around. I'm not sure. That could have been what it was. Yeah. So now I'm retired from active duty, but not retired from life, despite the fact that I look like Paul Kruger here with this beard, or Father Christmas for those of you around the world. Yeah, no, this was a beard that I was growing on purpose for a debate that I had, and that's over now. I was going to cut it afterwards, but then it became my lockdown protest beard. Since I can't get my hair cut, and I have to put eight gallons of goop in it so that it doesn't hang around like I'm a 1970s HR Puff and Stuff character in a television. Anyway, so the beard is staying a little bit longer. We'll see, but it will eventually come away. So there
All
you
right,
go.
cool. A very colorful and awesome career, obviously. And I thought it would be interesting to have Chris on the show and we talk about 9/11, September 11th, 2001, which for a lot of people was a very pivotal point in their lives for some people. And for me, especially, I was in a very interesting situation at that time. And obviously, Chris was in the military at that time. So I thought it'd be cool to get his perspective of it. And so I thought we'll start. I see there's already questions and comments coming in. Hello, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have Mikhail. I see you. Chico is back. We have Polly Seven Fire. It's good to see you, Polly, here. And we have Tommy Kutsia just joined in. Hello. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please stick around. Like I said, what's going to happen now is Chris and I are going to just tell each other where we were at the point of 9/11. And then I guess the questions can start flowing in. I see there's already a few questions. We'll get to them. But yeah, so I'll go first. And
Well, Joe, before you start, can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was boasting my CV there. No, no, you did ask me to say something else. You asked me to mention my stream. So after we finish here, I'll be doing a live stream For those of you not in the U.S., you're certainly welcome to tune in. Maybe you'll find something interesting. This will be a live stream at 3:35 Eastern Standard or 9:35 in South Africa and Botswana. This will be for Memorial Day. Today is Memorial Day in the United States. It's a federal holiday to celebrate our fallen in combat. And so I'll be doing a stream. It'll be more somber than my usual ones, but I promise not to put you to sleep. And maybe you'll learn something interesting about the U.S. and our history and why we celebrate this day. But anyway, thanks, Joe. I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but you did ask me to mention it, and I neglected that.
No worries. I wanted you to mention that. You're right. And also, I think it was pure coincidence that we're talking about 9/11 on Memorial Day. That was not planned. Um, yeah, so let me start off by saying I was, I believe, 2001. I must have been like 13-ish, 12, somewhere there. And I was coming home from school. That's what I remember. And I opened the door. My mom's crying, and she says, "You won't believe what happened." And my mom, my dad are in their bedroom. They're shocked by what we see. And I didn't see the first plane hit the tower. I saw the second plane hit the tower. Um, and for me as a kid, that was like so surreal. It felt like I was watching a movie. And then slowly but surely, the news about the Pentagon came out. And then later on in the day, or shortly after that, the news about the plane that fell in the, I think it was the fields. Um, as that was all going, yeah, I remember my mom was crying a lot, worried about some of our family. Um, my dad was just angry. I remember that. And that was, as a kid, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it because I heard the news later on. They were saying America's being attacked and all that, and I didn't quite grasp what that meant. But I do remember this, and this is what I think changed everything for me in that after 9/11, which was a little bit difficult to talk about. But basically, the next day at school, obviously the whole world knew now. There was no avoiding it. There was nothing. Like everybody knew. Um, we had an assembly at school, and this the school I used to go to was a mix of Egyptians and Americans, and it was known as the Modern Education School, Modern Education American School. So there was a lot of American teachers there as well. And our principal announces that, okay, cool, we're going to have an assembly to talk about what happened uh, yesterday, and everybody's there. Like this was a big school. This had like a grade. I think it was from grade 1 till grade 12. So it's a lot. A lot of students, like a lot. And we're all standing in our grades in the line, and the principal comes out. Now I don't remember her entire speech, but I remember she said things like, "What happened was a tragedy because innocent people died." And it sounded quite all right at the beginning, but the tone changed halfway through. And she ended the speech by saying the Americans deserved it, and everyone in the school, except for the Americans and except for American students, except for the American teachers, were clapping and cheering. And obviously, I wasn't. My American friends weren't. My American teachers, some of them were crying. The next day, pretty much, I think all of them gave in their resignation. We didn't see them. There was all but one that stayed, a teacher of mine who was my history teacher, Sharif. He stayed. He was half Egyptian. He's like me, half Egyptian, half also from Texas, American and stuff. And yeah, I was from that day on. When I heard those words from my principal, I knew that everything was going to be different, and I was right. What followed was a barrage of bullying. A lot of my American friends left. They fled. I would say. I think they were scared because slowly but surely we were being targeted. I was bullied and beat up, and I remember once they took my science book, which was a very expensive science book at the time, and they had taken it. And I remember I was furious. Like I'm like, where's my science book? Where's my science book? It's a very important book. I need to study. and it was gone for like almost half the day, and then all of a sudden it was there on my desk, and I open it, and it just had like scribblings of, F America, go home, why are you here? The one time I was ambushed in class just before break time, and I was beaten up by at that time I think it was in grade 5. So I was beaten up by like the grade 8s and the higher. And I came home, and I had a bit of a black eye, and my mom was furious. She was like, "What happened?" And I was so scared that I didn't want to tell her, but she was like, "I'm gonna go to your school and find out who it was anyway." And so I told her, I said like, "Well, some kids beat me up," and we went the next day to the principal. She was furious, obviously. And the principal didn't really do anything to the guys that did it. They got a slap on the wrist. They got like, I think the one guy got a week suspension, and that was like the biggest like um, the biggest thing that ever, like the biggest punishment that anyone ever got was just a suspension for 1 week. The other guys just got detention for that week. And yeah, I lived my whole life, the rest of my life in Egypt, almost scared for my life. Every time I used to skateboard when I was in Egypt, and um, I had gone to America. This is like 3 years after 9/11. Now I had gone to America, and when I came back, I actually, ironically, I guess, became very patriotic about America through this experience. Like I was so patriotic because everybody was like, "You shouldn't be American. You guys are evil people," and stuff like that. And I just kept on going against it and fighting it. And when I went to America 3 years after 9/11, I bought boxers, but they were the American flag, and I used to skate with them, so my pants used to fall. But now what happened was some Egyptian kids saw that, and they again beat me up, and they didn't even know me. I had never seen them before. They literally clotheslined me when I was skateboarding, and they just started beating on me. And luckily, some of my friends came to protect me. But yeah, that was my life. I've been in a few fights in Egypt because I'm American. That was it. There's no other reason. The moment they heard me, the moment they saw me, they just wanted to beat me up. They saw me as the enemy. They didn't even know me. I don't like Bush, by the way. Like I want to say this. Like I hate Bush. I don't think he was a great president. I think he manipulated the system. Um, I do think that he didn't see what I saw, because I was on the other side in the enemy lines, so to speak, so I could see from their perspective uh, what was going on their ground. But yeah, so I don't want to go on this whole spiel, but um, that's basically what my experience was, and why I don't like Egypt is because of my experiences there. I have learned that it's not. I used to. I'll be honest. I used to really hate Muslims. I'm not gonna lie. I used to really despise them, but it took me a while to realize that it's not them. It wasn't them. It's a specific extreme group of people, and yeah, I think the day that Osama bin Laden was killed was definitely a day of how can I say, I cried. I was proud in that moment that the army was able to go in and get that son of a bitch. So yeah, that was in a nutshell sort of my experience.
Well, yeah, no, it's very disturbing. It's deeply disturbing how ignorant and stupid so many billions of people on this planet can be, rejoicing when someone else suffers misery. You look at the sickness in communities in parts of the world where girls are stoned to death for supposed acts of dishonor for the family, and people eagerly jump into it and cheer stoning a girl to death. It's just so to hear that. I'm not surprised that that's the case in Egypt. The problem, of course, when it comes to the Arab world, is that for decades the West has allowed Arab tyrants to propagate propaganda which is dishonest and inaccurate about America. Um, the number of Muslims in this country has grown exponentially in the last 40 years, and particularly in the last 20 years, but certainly in the last 40 years, it's grown exponentially. We have thousands of mosques in this country. Muslims worship in freedom here, unlike in other parts of the world. where Muslims are discriminated against by other Muslims. So yeah, it's very disturbing. But so I'll go ahead and talk about where I was at on 9/11. So on 9/11 of 2001, I was working in the U.S. Embassy in Tunis. So right in the heart of the Arab world, but in a secular part of it. So I wasn't too far away from where you were, but I wasn't 13 like yourself. I was a little bit older. Anyway, yeah. So I was a foreign area officer in my training phase, during which I traveled across Africa and did research into politics, economics, military, security, every facet of human activity. So I did that going across the continent. And this particular day, I was not on a trip. I had just come back from Ghana. I'd been in Ghana for a big conference in Accra, and I only been back for a couple of days. So I was in the embassy, and I worked in the attaché office. And of course, you can imagine we have places where you can do classified things, places where you can't. Obviously, you can't have unclassified email in the same place you're doing other things. So I was in the room where the unclassified email computer was at, so I could check my mail to coordinate for another trip. And we had a television, a couple of televisions, and anyway, so of course it had, CNN. What else are you going to get, off the Hotbird satellite? That's the one we had. He probably recognized that from Egypt. But anyway, so one of the gunnery sergeants who worked in the attaché office came and said, "Hey, Major Wyatt," or no, it's Captain Wyatt. I promoted a few days after this, I think. He said, "Captain Wyatt, did you see this?" I'm like, "Well, what's up?" He said, "You got to come see this." And it was moments after the first plane had struck, or a couple minutes after the first plane had struck in Lower Manhattan. So we're standing there talking about it, and he goes, "Yeah, they're saying it's an accident." I'm like, "Gunny, look at that. You can see 40 miles, man. Visibility is, unless somebody had a heart attack and was flying in restricted airspace and flew into a building, that's impossible, man. There's no way that it's an accident. This is intentional." I said, "Have you seen anything? Have any jets been scrambled from McGuire or somewhere like that, or a guard base?" And he goes, "No, I just turned this on." So we're standing there talking about it, and I start talking about terrorism in Europe that I had dealt with previous 80s and 90s, and the challenges of that. And I said, "This is really something." And then, of course, like much of the world, we watched live as the second plane flew into the second tower. And then all bets were off. It was pretty obvious it was terrorism then. And of course, you had the plane that was headed towards either the White House, the Pentagon, or Congress. We don't know which one. But it was taken out by the courageous passengers, and it crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. A site that I've been to, by the way. It's a few hours from here to the west. Yeah, it's quite solemn. It's literally in the middle of freaking nowhere. There's nothing there. So kudos to those brave folks on that flight. They saved countless lives by taking action when they did. Not just in Washington, but even over any settlement. It literally landed in a place where nobody's at, in the middle of a forest and a mining area. So no one was harmed by it, to my knowledge. Anyway, so yeah, that kind of put things on a footing. I was doing my foreign area officer stuff, and then shortly after this, I found out that I was being sent back to the intelligence service and not going to be a foreign area officer. And I was assigned to the National Security Agency in the aftermath of 9/11, and that's where I went and where I worked at for a few years. But I was approaching 20 years of service at that point, and I had, with my enlisted time, I had just a few years before I get to 23 years or something like that. And I decided that I really wanted to become a foreign area officer and go back to that. So I made a request. And honestly, to be honest, the fact that I spent so much time in Africa might perversely be one consequence of 9/11, because when 9/11 happened, U.S. Army stopped allowing military intelligence officers in the rank of major, lieutenant colonel, and colonel to leave the Army. You couldn't retire. You couldn't separate. You were forced to stay on active duty because of the crisis. And so when I put my paperwork in 2003, requesting to return to a foreign area officer branch, my year group, that's a cohort each year. Just think, graduating class from high school or college, that's your cohort, was actually larger than it normally would have been. There were more officers than they needed in intelligence because they weren't releasing anybody. So when I put in a request to transfer laterally to the foreign area officer branch and be an Africanist again, number one, I had to be qualified. I had to have the language capability. So I had that, and they had to want me. Well, they knew me in that branch, and they knew what I was capable of, and so they were happy to have me. So I think perversely, one of the ways I got back to being an Africanist is because of 9/11. And then I went back to doing that. And after I left the National Security Agency, I went to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the rest of my career was spent being a foreign area officer focused on Africa. So another 20 years doing that. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I was at and what was happening. To me, from the outset, it was pretty obvious that this was intentional. And then within minutes, it was clearly intentional. And just the shocking nature of it. We often hear about intelligence failures. I think that 9/11 was an extremely audacious, well-planned, well-executed, and brilliant effort to take advantage of vulnerabilities of an open democratic society. But at the same time, I think it was a tremendous failure of governance on the part of the federal and state governments in the United States to be so naive in the face of so many things that had happened. We had so many warning signs, and I'm not just talking about people reporting strange Arab guys taking flight classes and not asking for instruction on how to land a plane. They just wanted to know how to take it off and fly it. I mean, that should have sent alarm bells up at the FBI. But I'm also talking about the attacks on the Cole, the attacks on Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, our embassies there, and the fact that Osama bin Laden declared war on us, Al Qaeda. Yeah, and we just simply ignored it and treated it as a distant law enforcement issue. And I think that was an absolute abject failure of our society. And of course, we can lay a lot of politicians blame, but it's a societal failure. But I mean, it's an open society. Those are the risks that you face.
Yeah. Wow. So I think it's going to be very interesting, especially getting your point of view with everything that was happening. Comments are already coming in. I'm going to let's look at them very quickly. So I want to go back to the top here with Polly7 Fire, who said 9/11 is very close to him, being Polly. He's a fireman. Very keen to hear, was lucky enough to stand on top of the World Trade Center North Tower in December 2000 and visit the Memorial and Freedom Tower in 2015. I have one or two questions. And he says here, rest in peace, the brave of 343 firemen that died that day. Yes, rest in peace. There was, Polly, you can start sending in your questions. Everyone can start sending in their questions. But I think the biggest one that people will want to know from you, Chris Wyatt, do you think it was an inside job?
No. What do you mean by inside job? Well, I should ask that question. What do you mean by inside job? Do you think the Bush administration was responsible? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No, it's lunacy. We have evidence that this was planned a couple of years before Bush became president, before he even announced his candidacy. It had nothing to do with George Bush. As far as this knows, inside job. Listen, I worked in intelligence. I can't disclose class information. Trust me, this is not an inside job. It's like the 50,000 Jews were evacuated from the towers. What a bunch of nonsense. It's interesting. The thing about the World Trade Center buildings is that a lot of the people who worked there weren't even Americans on every given day.
Yeah.
I mean, a huge percentage. And so almost every country around the world, certainly every large country around the world, lost citizens in that event alone, just in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. So no, it's not an inside job. That's a conspiracy theory by people who can't live in the real world. Don't mean to insult anybody, but
no, I don't think it was a inside job. I think there was, like you said, failures in communication. I saw an interesting documentary that I actually explored that not theory, that's what happened, where they explained that at the time agencies didn't communicate well with each other. So like the FBI didn't communicate well with other, NSA and all these other things. And there were a lot of warnings that came up, but for whatever reason, people just didn't take it seriously. And unfortunately, that's what happened. There is this one theory I think that people are going to pounce on, saying that Osama bin Laden and Bush knew each other, which is why people think that it was an inside job. There's this one conspiracy theory that I've watched that says that apparently has evidence. I don't know. The documents they say is evidence, but I don't know. I think it is a bit far-fetched. Basically trying to make it look like it was another Pearl Harbor incident type of thing. But as you just said, no, that's not the case.
Well, it's before I go on that, something a little bit lighter there. I did see Beth's comment. She said I look like Hagrid from Harry Potter. Before that comment gets too far away, that was a little while ago, so I didn't want to miss it. I thought that was funny. Okay. So far as not communicating, yeah, we both agree on that. But let me explain a little bit better why a lack of communication was taking place. In the 1960s and the 1970s, American intelligence actors were guilty of violating the constitutional rights and civil liberties of many Americans, including Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Black Panthers, although I don't have a lot of sympathy for the Black Panthers, but their rights were violated, along with a lot of other people and many people in the anti-Vietnam War movement in the late 60s, early 70s. We had intelligence services that were not authorized to doing things, and spying on people, putting undercover agents in, tapping telephone lines without warrants. And I know this quite well because as an Army counterintelligence agent, that's a federal law enforcement official. I have well, I don't now. I had a badge and credentials that I carried with the authority to arrest people and that sort of thing. As a federal law enforcement agent, the thing is that we were greatly constrained in the U.S. Army as a consequence of the Church Commission. I think it was the Church Commission in the 1970s, because their investigation turned up all these abuses, and the U.S. Army was one of the actors that was heavily involved in misdeeds. And so, as a consequence, all of us in the intelligence community had restrictions placed on us. And honestly, the U.S. Army went above and beyond what the other places like the FBI and Naval Criminal Investigative Services and OSI and the Air Force and other actors, they went beyond that, and we were so constrained. So, for instance, as a counterintelligence agent, if I was in the Air Force for OSI, if I am investigating someone over, smuggling cigarettes, it's a military member, or stealing things from the exchange, or if I open a counterintelligence investigation and I investigate them, and then I discover there's criminal activity, but I can't see anything that's counterintelligence related. In the Air Force, I can continue the investigation because I'm also law enforcement. In the Navy, with NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Services, I can start a counterintelligence investigation, but if I find out that, well, no, it's a question of someone using child pornography, I can continue the investigation. But in the Army, the moment I find out it's criminal activity that's not related to espionage, sabotage, or treason, then I have to back off and I hand the investigation over. What's frustrating about that for an Army agent is that oftentimes the criminal activity supports the terrorist activity. And so there were rules, regulations, and actual public law that limited what we were allowed to do. And that is also the case when it came to information sharing. But the intent of that was to protect Americans from the abuses the intelligence community had made in the past. Now, some people say, well, you're oversimplifying. Perhaps a little, but not really. The bottom line is that because of past abuses, we went out of our way in the 70s to protect Americans' constitutional rights. And in doing so, we overstepped so far as protecting the nation. We were protecting individuals more than the group as a whole. And so it's important for people to understand that one of the reasons why there was a lack of communication is that it was intentional. The government put in place protections and measures to prevent these agencies from sharing information. But if you ask me, I think it was not well thought out and was foolish, and we found out later on.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the documentary said. So I think you and I can agree that it wasn't an inside job. I know the conspiracy theories. There's this stuff like it was a demolition because of the way it they see explosions as the tower goes down. There's that theory of the metal can't melt, or the jet fuel can't melt the metal, and all that, which have all been debunked. If you go on YouTube, there's people that can debunk those theories. For me, you know what? I think for me, what makes it so true to me is being in Egypt. I got to see the enemy and the way the enemy reacted. I got to see. It was only later on when I took a really big interest in 9/11 and started to really go into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and stuff like that. I saw apparently a week before the attack, Osama bin Laden had given a speech to his Al Qaeda people and said that an attack is imminent and it is coming. And it was 9/11. They were talking about it. And it circulated in Egypt. I didn't realize this, but it circulated in the Arab countries. And I found out about it later. And just the way the Egyptians reacted, the Saudi Arabians reacted, every Arab nation, that there was no social media at this time, but these videos were going around at the time, via email and stuff like that, and the the one footage I remember, which was on I think it was one of the local news channels in Egypt. I can't remember which one, but it was definitely on the news, and I remember this clear as day. Think the day after, or even as it was happening, they were showing the streets of Egypt, the streets of Saudi Arabia, the streets of just every Arab nation, of people in the streets cheering and throwing their hats up like they've won everyone's won the lottery. And that to me was it just made it so real. You can say that it was planned by Bush or whatever, but I think that is, like you said, something that people can't live in reality, that people can't be that evil that this, because a lot of people say like, oh, Osama was in a cave. How can someone in a cave plan this whole thing? But yeah, they're a very big organization, and even people in Egypt are scared of them, Al Qaeda, and I don't know, just the
Well,
reaction
Joe,
wasn't that.
Osama wasn't the one planning it. If I could for just a second, can we just, you and I, take a moment of silence? It's 3 p.m. here in the U.S., and the nation is taking a moment of silence
Oh,
for our
okay,
fallen. If we could just take a moment, just for a moment.
absolutely.
Thanks. All right, thanks, Joe. I just wanted to take that moment because it's Memorial Day, and at 3 p.m. we do it. That's one reason why I wasn't going to do my stream at 3. I didn't want to interrupt it,
Okay.
so that's no, that's no, because my stream is on Memorial Day. I didn't want to do it. That seems kind of flashy to do it in your stream. If I could really quickly, there's a couple questions that I think really need to be addressed before time gets away from us. One of the questions was, why weren't jets scrambled? Somebody asked that a few moments ago in the chat.
Yes.
Let me explain that. Okay, during the Cold War, we had a far more extensive military deployment system across the United States. That began to be dismantled in the early 1990s, and we had lots of base closures. And as a consequence, two things happened. When I was a young man and I went to university, I remember seeing Nike Hercules missile sites around Athens, Ohio, our university, because it was a medical research facility, among other things, important enough to be considered a target for the Soviets. And so we had anti-aircraft missiles out there, anti-ballistic missiles out there. And we had that around a lot of our major cities. But that all disappeared as the Cold War wound down. And so we had no anti-aircraft batteries that could shoot down aircraft stationed around our cities in America, only around a few critical sites, obviously related to the military. But there were no anti-aircraft missiles around D.C. ringing the city to protect it from a stray aircraft, whether it was military or civilian. That's the first thing. Then why weren't jets scrambled? Because there's no base anywhere close to Washington, D.C. The closest place that the U.S. Air Force has jet fighters is Langley, Virginia. And it takes, I don't know the exact amount of time. I think it takes like 20 minutes or something, like 27 minutes for them to respond, assuming they're sitting in the cockpit. But they weren't on strip alert because it wasn't fathomed about our vulnerability. Now, without disclosing where things are at, we have aircraft that are on 24/7 strip alert that can be in the air in less than 60 seconds around DC and protect our airspace around DC and other critical metropolitan areas in the U.S. that we didn't have before. And that, again, is, I think, a consequence of a short-sightedness and an inability to anticipate what imagination an enemy can have for us. And then, if I can, real quick, I'll go a little bit further here. Someone asked the question about why did it take 10 years to catch bin Laden. And I'd like to answer that question, but I also like to offer my viewpoint on bin Laden. After 9/11, everybody wanted bin Laden's head. I was working at the National Security Agency, and when people asked me about it, I said, well, I hope they don't catch the guy. And they're like, what? What's wrong with you? I said, well, think about it. If you now, you got to keep in mind when he was eventually taken out, it was long after the event, and his popularity had waned, his influence had waned. But at that time, he was a wildly popular. It's like Che Guevara. The nastiest piece of human excrement on the planet was Che Guevara, but his ethos, his mythology about him, like he's some great figure, is just out of proportion. And that's what it was with Osama bin Laden at the time. So if we had captured him in 2002, 2003, we would have had to try him, right? And that would have given him a world stage to run his mouth. If we had captured him or we killed him, then we would have become an even bigger target, people seeking revenge for killing the great hero Osama bin Laden. So
That's
to
true.
me, the best thing that could ever happen, and this is what I said in 2001, and I said all the way until the time that they finally got him, is that the best thing that could happen to Osama bin Laden is that he dies on kidney dialysis machines in a cave in Afghanistan, detached and isolated from all of his lieutenants and unable to influence anybody, a forgotten figure. That's almost what happened, but they actually got him in Pakistan. Now, so far as why it took 10 years, well, there's a very simple reason for that. Without disclosing classified information, simply telling you what's publicly available, we were listening to Osama bin Laden's conversations on a commercially available telephone network, satellite-based telephone network. And they were about to go after him, but they couldn't get him right away because they were
Yes.
trying to get the spread of the network. And we have isolated cells. If you just take out the head, then it springs up everywhere. So they had built the network out, and he hadn't had any other attacks on us. So they were about to go after him when some loudmouth, egotistical member of our U.S. Congress went before the cameras and told people that, yes, we listen to Osama bin Laden's communications on this type of
I
communication, and we've
remember
been
that.
listening to it all along. And then Osama bin Laden went silent. And from that time until about 4 or 5 years later, we couldn't even find evidence the guy was alive because he relied entirely on couriers, and they were killing their couriers at risk of them disclosing things. If they had any doubts about them whatsoever, they would murder them and then would get someone else to replace them. So it was truly medieval communication that Osama bin Laden was using. But here's the bottom line. The fact that we didn't get him for 10 years, so what? I'm okay with that. After February, March of 2002, the guy had no influence over Al-Qaeda. It was Zayman, whatever his name, the guy who was busy in Iraq that we eventually got, the Egyptian guy. Anyway, but he was the one actually running the network, and he was more important to take out. We took him off the board, and that crippled Al-Qaeda. But of course, they proved to be an inspiration for a lot of other players. So I had no problem with not capturing bin Laden for years. Getting him is either an emotional reaction or, in my view, it's just an emotional reaction or it's revenge. I don't need revenge. We can get that in other ways. And I was trying to be objective, not emotional. And that's why I said, we don't need the guy. We isolate him. We cut the head off. He can't do anything. I remember Obama jumping for joy and claiming what a great operation he did and how wonderful president he is because he took out bin Laden. And my thought was that, we took him out 8 years ago. The guy's been ineffective. So you killed him. All right, nice for you. But I don't get excited when people die. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess that's where you and I differ. But it was a moment of emotional of emotion for me. It brought back a lot of old wounds that I felt I could put to rest. But you're right. Other people, other organizations, definitely, spurred out of we have ISIS now. We have all these other cell groups or terrorist groups.
Boko Haram,
Yep.
Al-Shabaab.
Yep. So and Obama. I keep on doing that. Osama kept on. Did warn people, said that if they kill me, this is very close. Like I think it was like the year of after 9/11. I remember he was on TV a lot saying like, if the Americans get me, note that there will be more to replace me. Like he said that thing where if you cut off a head, two more will spring up. And he was right. But I think the Americans have been, in my opinion, maybe it's not fast enough, but obviously, like you've said before, and I think this is what maybe some people don't understand, is you've mentioned this before on the show, where you cannot talk about certain things on the show or in general, because certain people's lives are in danger. For you to talk about American secrets would put in danger lives. And I think when someone in your position or in the NSA or wherever that has all the information at their fingertips can see like, crap, if we were to kill this guy now, that means X, Y, and Z might happen and might lead to an even greater catastrophe. And I think that's what, like, it's a very big chess game, so to speak, in the world of I don't want to say assassination, but this whole
geopolitics.
War. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot at stake, like. And then I do want you to try and, if you can, give your an answer to this one, because I think Cloud Sounds would like to know as well. He said debunk Building 7. So I remember he mentioned that he was part of our show last time, and he asked the question about the World Trade Center Building number 7. I think that's the building that was wasn't hit by a plane. It was far from the towers, excuse me, but it's still collapsed. Do you know anything about that? Can you comment on that?
I'm not sure what he's asking us to debunk. There were 7 different major buildings as part of the World Trade Center. That's why it's called the Center. It was a collection of buildings that were built down there in Lower Manhattan. 1 and 2 were the towers, of course, and then they collapsed. There were 2 other buildings heavily damaged, and one of those, maybe that's 7 he's talking about, later collapsed from structural. What people have to remember here is that there's a lot of stuff that happened. I mean, you have this massive steel structure that crumbles and falls. The impact of that, what it did shaking the ground, even though the soil beneath the ground under Manhattan is wonderful from a construction standpoint because it's solid granite. And so it doesn't move around much like, loose, sandy and loamy soils along near oceans. But that's one of the reasons why New York exists, because there's solid granite underneath it. So even though there's granite under it, there's still the tremendous force of these buildings collapsing, all that weight coming down, and then the air that's forced out pushing against buildings to the sides. That had a tremendous impact. And then the inferno, the intense heat that came from all the metal, all the plastic, the aluminum that was in the building, all of that emanating out around the buildings, affecting the structure of the girders and the material that hold those buildings together, made many buildings structurally weak. And there have been a few other buildings that were later torn apart, unrelated to the World Trade Center, as a consequence of the damage that was done at that time. Amazingly, the 17th century church, it was just a block or two away from there, that thing survived, a stone church, but I would guess because it was a small size, the build, made out of stone, so it's loose. I'm not a structural engineer. I'm just, supposing here. And then the other piece is that probably the force of air and it went out in the other direction, went north and south, I believe, because two towers are like this, and it went north and south, I believe. But I'm not an expert on that. But I'm not so sure what the question of debunking 7 is. There have been lots of conspiracy theories about that. I have been to the new World Trade Center facility and been up to the windows on the world a few times now. It's pretty darn amazing view. I was actually supposed to go to the Twin Towers, but my departure from Tunisia was delayed by a couple of months, and so I was supposed to be in New York a few weeks before the 9/11. In August, I would have been there. So I didn't get to go back up on top of the building like Paulie did. Excuse me. So I missed out on that. But I'm not sure what the debunking of 7 is. I don't know if I answered it or not.
Yeah, well, if Cloud Sounds, if you're still listening, just give us a little bit more information and we'll discuss it. Very quickly, before I forget, I want to mention that. Oh, crap, now I forgot. You were saying something now, and I wanted to mention it very quickly. Oh, man. Okay, never mind. I will come back to you.
Well,
Hopefully.
let me go on something about that very quickly while you're trying to think of that, Joe. So you were talking about oh gosh, now I've lost it. But oh yeah, no, you said someone in a position would know all this stuff. Well, the thing is that don't get this wrong. From the moment that 9/11 happened, the U.S. government actively and seriously and never let up until they got him was hunting Osama bin Laden. If they could have got him at any day before, captured or killed him before they killed him 10 years later, they would have done it. Yeah. So, just because what I was giving was what I believe a rational, objective approach about the merits of taking him out or not. There were discussions about that in the U.S. government, but the ration and reason would have been trumped by a sense of we can get this guy now by any administration, and so that would have been the case. I mean, look at all the leaders of Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, not Boko Haram, Al Shabaab, and Al Qaeda and Al Qaeda Islamic Maghreb. Every chance we get to take out one of the leaders, we do, and so they would have taken out Osama bin Laden. It's just a question they couldn't get to him because someone opened their big mouth.
Yeah. No, I remember that. I remember when that guy came out and said, "Yeah, we're tracking." I'm like, "Oh my!" Even me as a kid, I was like, well, "What are you doing?" It was like a rookie mistake.
Well, yeah, because Osama bin Laden thought that he was using a encrypted system. He was. But do you think that we can't break encryption? Come on. He thought his communications, and even if we couldn't break the encryption, the mere fact that you're using a signal from a certain location in a certain part of the world, doing certain things in a certain place, you can figure out the math on that one. But yeah, once someone opened their mouth, I think Osama bin Laden's like, "Oh my goodness, I must stop using this device." Yes. No, that was my best Osama bin Laden. I haven't done that in a while. But Paulie asked a question about future. Thank you. Paulie asked a question about future threats beyond flying civilian airliners into buildings.
Bring it up.
Yeah. Well, there's two that come to mind, and both of them are already on the table. Some people talk about them, but these are genuine threats, and not just from terrorists, but also in this asymmetric world, from criminal syndicates, from hostile governments, from the Chinese. You notice I didn't say they're a hostile government, but I said the Chinese. So Iran, North Korea, other folks, but specifically cyber is a major concern. Now, it got people's attention a few years ago when there was concern that someone broke into our power grid system in North America and was trying to shut down transformer stations and cause power failures. Think about it. Now, the problem with that is that the law still has to catch up with actual reality out there. Our laws still aren't really written in a fashion to address cybercrime in the way they should. So, for instance, let's say you're sitting in Switzerland, and you're nothing to do with the Swiss government. You just happen to be living in Switzerland, and you log in with a computer, your laptop or your device, and you are very clever, and you break into the North American power grid system. And from there, you decide you're going to attack Cleveland, and you shut down a transformer station, which causes a cascading effect and knocks out much of the Midwest for several hours. Is that a crime, or is that an act of war? Now, if it's a state doing that, that's legitimately could be considered an act of war. Think about it. Why would that be an act of war? Well, because people rely on electricity to run ventilators and respirators and medical diagnostic equipment for people living in or staying in hospitals. Also, think of all the accidents that could happen as a result of that, loss of life from traffic lights suddenly going out in the middle of an intersection, or bridges, drawbridges going up or down. That is an act of war. Some people disagree, but I'm telling you, if a state does it, that is an act of war. If the Russians do that to us, they're committing an act of war. Much in the same vein as if North Korea fires a ballistic missile over the airspace of Japan, that's an act of war. If an individual does it, then maybe it's a little more gray, depending on what their affiliation is, and you don't know right away. If, for instance, you knew with perfect clarity the moment that attack occurred, you could trace it back to, say, I don't know, Parpupistan. Parpupistan did it. We know it's a state. So Parpupistan is now committing an act of war. But if we trace it back to John Smith in Parpupistan, is he working on behalf of the state? Is he Pentley? Is he a kid in high school as a hacker? It will take longer to determine it. So it's a very challenging aspect of what's going to happen in the future. And the other piece here is biological warfare. Just look at how the world has been crushed by the hysterical overreaction of governments around the world with their lockdown measures in COVID-19. Now imagine a pathogen that's designed in a lab to do this, to cause this kind of paralysis in political leadership. And that could happen by a terrorist group. It could happen by another state. If it's done by either, it's an act of war. So anyway, those I think are some of the future challenges: biological designer weapons, and also the cyber issue. People always talk about suitcase bombs and stuff like that. That's always a legitimate concern. But the real issue here, I think, going forward, is cyber and biological. That's the two things that we're most vulnerable at and easiest to do the most damage for almost nothing.
Yeah, I definitely think that cyber and biological is the next thing that we have to be worried about. I think that after 9/11, travel has become so strict, especially to the US, and understandably so. It's why you stand in the queue in the airport and you have to take off your shoes, your belt, your pants, your this, your that. And there was like 5 security checks last time I went. And rightfully so. I understood it, I accepted it, and I happily did it. But I definitely think that these guys, these terrorist groups, are definitely working on something that's biological, or like you said, what was the other one? Biological and cyber.
Cyber.
Yeah.
Well, we've seen biological warfare on the part of people in the past. In Tokyo, in the subways, biological agents were released, sarin gas, I think it was, or something like that, by the terrorist group there, and they killed people. And we've also seen the Bhagwan Rashi and his people poisoned people in Oregon about 20, 30 years ago, trying to kill off community leaders and local leaders, and that was essentially terrorism here in the U.S., domestic terrorism. So we've seen biological terrorism take place in the past. It's not new. It's just not that people don't pay enough attention to it. Yeah. I think that Paulie was explaining to Beth that the conspiracy with the World Trade Center building number 7 was that the CIA had an office there. I don't know if that's true or not, and that's not me with I can't confirm or deny. I honestly don't know. If it had an office there, so what? What does that have to do with, I know that the Marshal Service probably had an office there. There are federal agencies that had offices around there. There's a federal building just down the street from there. So what? That's not where the CIA operates out of, and legally they're not allowed to operate in the States. The only thing they can do in the state is have their headquarters and do analysis. They can't do operations here. So if they had an office in New York, so what? I know the FBI had offices in New York because we had a counterterrorism task force up there ever since 1994 in the first World Trade Center bombing. So yes. Maybe they were helping them out. I don't know. But I don't know anything about the CIA there. That's the honest truth.
Also, with that whole CIA theory, like that to me, the plan was to attack America at 4 different hotspots. The market, which was the trade centers. The intelligence or counterintelligence, which was or army, which was the Pentagon. Obviously, the White House. I think the White House, which was going to be the next target because that's where the president is, and they wanted to hit hard. So some people are like, yeah, but maybe they wanted to also attack this and that. No. They hit the target. They hit the World Trade Center. That's what they wanted to hit, and they killed a lot of people in the process when they did that. And they definitely hit the Pentagon. I think they wanted to do more damage with the Pentagon, but they didn't succeed in doing so. And also there's a big conspiracy theory around that one because they're like, the Pentagon's the most heavily, there's a lot of, CCTV cameras around the Pentagon. And yet there's not a lot of footage of the plane going into the Pentagon. I don't know how you feel
There's
about
not
that.
nearly as there's not nearly as much. I worked at the Pentagon. There's not nearly as much CCV to coverage as you think there might be. Actually, the fact that they caught the plane slamming into the building, I thought was quite impressive, and it was only because it came near an entrance. That's why they got it. People make a lot of assumptions about the Pentagon. I've worked there, so I can say if what the phrase you were looking for, talking about the financial heart, the White House, and the Pentagon were high value targets. That's
Yes,
what we say in
that's
the
the one.
military.
Yes.
Those were for Al Qaeda high value targets. And I think that Chico Munoz says that conspiracies about 9/11 are farcical. I agree. Most of them are absolutely farcical. Here's to me the saddest tragedy beyond the loss of life and the economic impact and all the people who are horribly affected, including the first responders and those who've lost their lives in conflicts trying to deal with this effect. All of that, I can't dismiss that. But beyond that, for society, lingering beyond that, is the all too comfortable willingness of citizens, ostensibly free citizens in liberal democracies, to surrender their liberties to the state to protect them against something because they live in unknown fear. And I'm drawing a direct parallel to COVID-19. The willingness of far too many people, and also for people to, to be snitches, that sort of thing, to turn against their fellow citizens. Oh, so and so's on the beach with their toddler. Oh, go arrest them. That kind of nonsense for people who are not endangering anybody. But the willingness to accept the Patriot Act and its restrictions, some of which were reasonable and necessary, some of which were over the top, and then the pervasive, and we're soon going to find out, shameful abuse of the state organs against Americans by the Obama administration, that people simply, that's fine, we're safe, we're protected. When you give up your liberty for freedom, you're not free.
Mm.
And I think people, especially in South Africa, see that today. Now, in South Africa, they didn't give up their liberty; it was appropriated from them.
Yeah.
But here in America, we gave up our liberty without pushing back against the Patriot Act. The renewal was just coming up, and there wasn't much in the way of civil discourse about it. There should have been a lot more discourse about it. Now, this is coming from someone from having worked inside the intelligence community at the national level. And I think that civil society has an obligation to fight for and protect our liberties. We certainly have an obligation to protect people, but there should be constraints, and not unreasonable ones like we saw in the build up to 9/11. But I think that we've gone a little too far in some of our freedoms now, and we're definitely gone too far in COVID-19 at the state and local level in many jurisdictions in America. So I think that people, that's probably the saddest part for me, is that it's all too easy for people, an unseen, unknown threat, to just go, oh, okay, I'll take my belt off. You can give me a body cavity search. Go ahead, stick your hand up my rectum. It's okay. I mean, pay no attention to the guy over there with a robe on and this bulky piece of metal hanging out of the side of it. I know I'm a danger. Go ahead and check my grandmother. She enjoys it when you finger her. Come on, it's a bit much. And and the other part of this too is the political correctness. Oh, I don't mean to offend Muslims. Well, who's offending Muslims? You're talking about extremists here. That has nothing to do with Islam. The political ideology. It's not a religious one.
Yeah.
The Islamic faith has nothing to do with this nonsense. People are contorting something just like others have contorted religion to do what they want throughout history. So, but the
Well,
kowtowing and the correctness, they're just, ugh. Anyway.
yeah. To your point, actually, this is what interested me a lot. So what happened was shortly after I was bullied the one evening or the one day at school, I started hanging out with my history teacher a lot, who, as I mentioned, was also from America and also from Texas. And I came to him the one day, and I'll never forget this. I told him, or I asked him, I said, why do Egyptians and Muslims hate America so much? And then he corrected me. He said, look, Joe, not all Muslims hate America. That is not true.
Right.
And then he said, but to answer your question as to why there is this anger towards America, and it's not just America, he corrected me again and he said, it's not America, it's Westernization. And then he took me back to even before the Ottoman Empire. We're talking about the Crusades, we're talking about all
Sure.
those events in the world that happened, which all led, he summed it up very nicely, but he had to go way back, showing me how just there's always been this fight between Westernization and the some of the Muslim culture, not all of it, just some of it, the extremists, like you said, that's the thing. It exists everywhere in history. It exists, like there was times with the Crusades. You could say that was the far right, or that killed many Muslims in that time, and same with Christians. Many Christians lost their lives, and it still happens till today. And yeah, I think to solve that problem, you're talking about a whole nother can of worms. But I want to also say that definitely not all Muslims were mean to me. As I grew older, I did have a lot of Muslim friends. They were amazing. some of them protected me quite well, and I, in some aspects, owe them a great debt. But unfortunately, those good moments were far and in
We're
between.
outweighed,
Yeah,
outweighed.
yeah,
Well, here's the thing. It's what frustrates me is that people. This is why religion and politics are such a useful tool. Ethnicity, differences. Politicians use differences to their advantage. A good example of this is Slobodan Milosevic going to the battle of in the Kosovo Plogi, where in 1389 about 35,000 noblemen and the cream of the crop of the Serbian army was wiped out and executed if they died on the battlefield by the Ottoman Turks. The Serbs consider that the birth of their nation, the day they got their hat handed to them and their asses kicked, which is rather bizarre. But he went there in 1987 and gave this speech in what had been Yugoslavia, the land of the South Slavs. Everybody, Croats, Bosniaks, Serbs, Montenegrins, were all part of the same family. He went there and stirred up Serb nationalism. And then a short time later, the country fell apart. And he used that difference. And Izetbegovic in Bosnia used the differences between secular Muslims or Bosniaks and Serbs and Croats to stir up. People do this all the time. But what really disturbs me is the fact that people are intellectually dishonest. Let me explain. So when George Bush said we're going on a crusade, people lost their crap. Sure. They lost it. Okay, well, first off, let's get things in perspective here. I'm not attacking Islam, but let's be factually correct here. Judaism is the oldest of the major three religions in the Western world. Then comes Christianity, and then comes Islam, the young pikers who've only been around for about 1,400 years. 623 is when this all started. By the way, Egypt, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, all of North Africa, Spain, the Balkans were Christian. Mm-hmm. The Muslims conquered them and either forced people to convert or slayed them by the sword. Yep. So for Christians to be in any of those countries is not historically wrong, and they can't say they don't have a claim to it. Now, I'm not defending Christianity. I'm just trying to make the point that the Crusades happened because the Muslims conquered the Holy Land that was holy to the Christians and Jews. And so European monarchies raised armies to go back and reconquer for Christianity. Yep. And so for people to lose their mind over the Crusades is just disingenuous and factually dishonest. And it really irritates me that people only pick select points in history to make their issue. Anyway, so I just want to make that point.
No, but you're absolutely right. And for a bit of background as well, in Egypt, that is still happening, where they are, I wouldn't say attacking Christians openly. There have been some cases, yes, where they do. But the religion is definitely being suppressed by the government, because in the years that I lived there, I used to live in a new complex, and I'm gonna make this very quick because we're almost out of time. We used to live in a new area. It was brand new in Egypt. They were expanding outside of Cairo, and in this compound, we call it a compound, but here it's a city, really. It's huge. We're talking maybe 10 kilometers wide in diameter, maybe a bit more. And I think I lived there for about 7 years. In the 7 years that I was there, not one church was built, and there must have been at least 10 mosques in that area, in that 10-kilometer radius area. So there is still, by the government, it's not the Muslims, it's the government. There was petitions to have a church made, and it started being built, and until this day it's not finished. But then again, if there's any of my Egyptian friends in Egypt that know me and are watching this, please let me know, email me and let me know if it is finished. But last time I checked, it wasn't. And these things exist. I'm not saying that it's the Muslim people that are doing it. I'm not saying the Muslim people don't like Christians, because it's not their choice. It's the people that are in charge of that complex and the government that make those choices with churches being built and all that stuff. So anyway.
Well, but it is a good point, Joe. Let me just one last point before we close this out. I lived in Tunisia, and I always get a kick out of people talk about disrespecting religion. And we always hear about people disrespecting mosque. And that does happen on occasion, but it really happens to synagogues a lot. But when I lived in Tunisia, there used to be a lot of French who lived there who were Roman Catholic. They left, and there's a very well-known police station that's out near some of the shopping areas. And when you drive by it, you'll look in, you'll notice that it is now this police station was a Catholic church. Mm. They took a Catholic church and turned it into a police station. Mm. When you're going to talk about insult to religion and people's faith, I don't think you get much greater than taking a church and using it as a police station. I mean, it still has the bell in it. It still has the tower, and it has police on it. Anyway, so these insults go across both sides, and and people need to recognize that when they're dealing about these issues about religion and ethnicity. Anyway, so
Absolutely.
thanks, Joe. I just wanted to get that last point out.
No worries, man. I know that you've got a stream in about 6 minutes, maybe a bit less. So I'm going to quickly sign off. For those of you who are watching, thank you so much, Beth Symes, Mikhail Kanaka. I hope we got to most of your questions. I see HBM Air was asking you a few questions about the vans outside Twin Towers. Again, we didn't really go into conspiracy theories. We don't really think they're real. Why did Bush take so long to respond? He was in a school, so he didn't want to alarm
So
the
long to
kids.
respond to what? To 9/11?
Yeah,
He
remember
responded the
there was
same
that
day.
whole thing where he was
Oh,
like
okay. So
whispered.
yeah,
He was in a
okay.
school. He was
It's
reading. I mean, he's not gonna go like,
right.
"We're under attack," and
Jump
then
up!
leave.
Everybody, run! And
I
all
mean,
the
I don't
kids are
like
like,
Bush. I don't like Bush,
it'd be
but I
like
mean, I
it'd be like
even
it would be like kindergarten cop. All the kids would start screaming around Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's what happened.
yeah.
So anyway,
Thanks so much for this stream. Need 2-3 hours talk on 9/11 comprehensively. Yeah, we could talk for a very long time about this. But anyway, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I put a link to Chris's channel in the description below. If this is the first time you've heard about him, please go check him out. I'm going to watch your stream, Chris, just now. So, yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for talking about this. If people want me to bring you on and we continue the conversation, they must just email me or comment in the video. If I get enough comments and enough likes on this video, we'll think about it. I'm sure there's much more we can talk about, but thank you so much, Chris, for giving me your time to talk about this topic, and I'll see you on your stream shortly. And to everybody else, if I don't see you later, I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.